Blog Talk Radio.
Warning, the following program may include profane language, controversial viewpoints, and perspectives on the true nature of reality so far removed from the status quo, they'll make your head spin like a top. Young children, corporate executives, and religious fundamentalists should turn away now.
Good evening, fellow Earthlings, and welcome to an extraordinary edition of Extraordinary Year. I'm your host, Tim Bravo, and I want to thank you for joining us tonight, 260 days until December 21st, 2012. Our guests tonight are Jeane Manning and Joel Garbon, co-authors of the book Breakthrough Power, How Quantum Leap New Energy Inventions Can Transform Our World. Jeane Manning became interested in free energy in 1981 when she met an electrician who had invented a special magnetic generator. She saw the potential for this technology to help the environment and the poor. And since that time, she's become an authority on the subject and has written or co-written 6 books, including Angels Don't Play This Harp, which has become one of the best sources of information about the HAARP technology, that's HAARP, used by world governments for a variety of purposes, some open and benign, some secret and nefarious. Joel Garbon is a founding member of the New Energy Congress and current president of the New Energy Movement, taking over those duties from the late Dr. Brian O'Leary, who was a United States astronaut and whose work in bringing new energy, or free energy, awareness to the public, we'll touch on tonight. Joel is also behind the documentary The Day Before Disclosure, which deals with the government's cover-up of UFO and extraterrestrial reality. Any regular listener to this program knows that's an issue near and dear to our hearts, so you can understand we are ecstatic to have them both with us tonight. Jeane and Joel, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tim.
Okay, so new energy versus free energy. Is there a difference?
Jeane, why don't you address that?
It can be synonymous, or people who want to stay a little bit closer to known scientists more likely to use the term new energy, because free energy carries a little baggage. It's like fingernails on the blackboard to some engineers because they've been so well educated in the laws of thermodynamics and really don't leave the door open for the possibility that something could be tapping into a previously unknown source of energy, which is what free energy refers to. And of course, the apparatus and the device isn't free; it costs to make, but the source is free, like the sun or the wind or the cosmos.
Or the cosmos. That's one way to put it. And I was curious how you were going to approach that. Now, Joel, you had the new energy movement. You appear to have a preference for new energy. Is that correct? For those same reasons?
What we mean by new energy really are things that go beyond the conventional renewables of wind and solar and biofuels and wave power. We consider those to be conventional renewable technologies. And by new energy, we're talking about more frontier science, new platforms in physics that can tap into sources of energy that maybe we have not been so good at measuring, but that have shown the potential to be tapped as a practical power source. So you may not be able to measure where that energy is coming from, but we can measure it when it's transformed into either mechanical power or electricity.
Okay. So let's talk about the different kinds of technologies that you guys look at. I'm personally aware of devices that use magnets to more or less perpetually push and pull to keep a generator going. I'm aware of using electrolysis to turn water into fuel somehow. I believe that's connected to Brown's gas. And I'm personally most intrigued by what's referred to as zero-point energy, or from the cosmos, as Jeane put it, which basically pulls the theoretically limitless energy from the source field, ether, what have you, which I believe Einstein actually theorized, and which David Wilcock has written about extensively in multiple books, and which is the center point of his newest book, The Source Field Investigations. So tell us about the different kinds of devices that you guys know about and how they work.
Jeane, why don't you lead off on this?
Okay, well, I'll lead off at the far end of the spectrum then, because that's where I came in. I first met a magnetic motor inventor, and he realized that if you could not overcome, but kind of get around the problem of the back electromotive force that slows down motors. I'm not putting that very well, but if you can create a different configuration, a different geometry, the way you build motor generator, that the power of magnetism can potentially keep things going. I mean, it doesn't get weaker the more work that's done. You can have a magnet that lifts 30 times its weight, and it'll keep lifting indefinitely, doesn't wear out if it isn't subjected to high heat or dropping. It'll keep on working. So this is the first inventor that I met, theorized what could possibly be the source. What are these magnets tapping into, perhaps? And he called his company Prawn Technology because the word prana is another word for the background energy of the universe, or life force, or some more esoteric form of energy. And that sounds pretty woo-woo, but in recent times, some scientists are actually having a second look at things that they'd poo-pooed before, and saying, we really can't explain what's going on in some of these unusual inventions that we are seeing, and the only thing that it might be is this energy from the vacuum. That's a more accepted terminology for zero-point energy or background energy of space. And so there have been a few highly credentialed scientists who've seen inventions that I've written about for years, like the solid state, that means no moving parts, little devices that are basically combinations of circuitry and magnetism that must indeed tap into this zero-point energy, background energy, whatever you call it. Because in one instance, it's quite well witnessed, that of a guy named Sparky Sweet. That was 1,000,000 times to 1 more output than input. Now that's just
and that was solid state?
Yes, that was.
So where's that energy coming from is the question.
Yeah, and a theorist by the name of Tom Bearden is one of the people that witnessed it, and so he started talking about energy from the vacuum, and he called it the vacuum triode amplifier. It was very real. The inventor himself kind of tripped things up, because that's often the case, that their own personal inclinations to whatever paranoia or whatever sidetracks them kind of messes things up. In his case, Sparky Sweet wasn't really disclosing exactly what he was doing to anybody, so he died with his secrets taken away with him. So I've given you the far end of the spectrum, and maybe Joel can take it a little bit back toward standard science, or accepted science, let's say.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things about the idea of zero-point energy is that term and that concept is well accepted in mainstream physics. And the term zero point itself is coming from the fact that even at the temperature of absolute zero, which is supposedly the point where there's no heat at all in a system, and where there can be no molecular motion, even at that extreme condition, it is still observed that helium exists as a fluid rather than a motionless solid. So that means there still must be some molecular motion. And that means that there must be some primal source of energy that is still active and in effect, that's imparting some degree of energy to those molecules to give them some kinetic activity, some motion. So that concept of zero-point energy is observable, and it's well accepted. How do you tap into it has been the conundrum. Now, there is a well-known experiment called the Casimir Effect, which is performed when very thin plates of highly polished metal are brought to very close proximity to each other, and there's a certain point at which they come so close they actually appear to attract each other. There's an attractive force. But what is theorized actually is that once you get to a very, very small distance, that there is a particular energy called the zero-point energy, which no longer can exert a repulsing effect between those plates, because you're now at a distance that's shorter than the wavelength of that form of energy. So it's acting as a force on the outside of those plates to actually push them together, rather than acting on all sides to push them from all directions. So the Castamere Effect is a well-known experiment that has been shown to demonstrate that there is this primal source of energy that exists everywhere in all bit of space, whether here on the planet or in outer space. So that's some background to describe that term. Now, I think the fact that, okay, we know that there's something out there that exists, it's difficult to measure. Our instrumentation tends to lag behind our awareness of the observable effects, is one of the things that kind of keeps a lid on the credibility of those who say that they've stumbled upon a device or spent a lot of their life researching and coming upon some really cool new invention that provides some usable energy, because mainstream science likes to be able to measure things all the time, and if you can't measure and can't explain and hypothesize and theorize, it tends to have limited credibility in that community. Myself, as an applied scientist, I'm more interested in what the usable effects are from our technology. So if you have something that can produce usable heat or usable mechanical power or usable electricity, these are all conventional outputs that have very real and practical applications for us. And I believe that that's the more important part of the equation. An analogy I would use is that if you get down there on the floor, Tim, and do some push-ups, and you do that, every day for a few weeks, you're going to notice that your muscles got bigger and they got stronger. Now, you may not know all that there is about the biology and metabolism of muscle cells to understand why they got bigger, but you know that they did, and you know that there's a good practical effect on your health and fitness and your strength. So it's not necessary for us to know all the background science to be able to apply something that's very useful. And that has big implications for our society in supporting and coming out with and using these devices.
Yeah, I wish that the academic scientists thought like you do, Joel, because you're a practical man. Well, they are looking for the theory, or they won't go ahead with actually developing something into a product. Things just get held up for the lack of a theory. For example, the patents aren't allowed because the theory doesn't explain some of these new science developments.
Yeah, and I want to get into patents a little bit later, especially as we start talking about Dr. Brian O'Leary. And I know, Joel, that you work closely with him. So the first thing I want to do is introduce for our listeners. I want you guys to know that our co-hosts are with us tonight. Canada and Matt are out there on the line. Catherine's out there. Monica's listening. The regular crew is all very excited to get a chance to talk to you guys about these technologies that so many people don't even know about. They don't have the first inkling about it, let alone the prevalence that it has and the length to which this information has been suppressed. And so,
well, Tim, it's hard to drag people away from Dancing with the Stars and American Idol and all the other stuff that seems to be distracting the populace from things that should, take a lot more precedence in our lives. It's unfortunate that for some reason we can't seem to take a good, sober look as a society at these chronic problems and show the maturity to put things in the right perspective. I mean, having entertainment certainly has its value, but it seems like our culture is so bent toward distraction that it makes it very challenging to have the type of dialogue that's required to have the attention of our citizens and then the sustained follow-through to get real solutions in place. And I don't mean to go off on a tangent here, but I get very concerned when I see that walking down the street or being, in a bus or being in the gym, that it's difficult even to have a conversation with so many people because they're plugged into a headset or head buried in their iPhone or otherwise off in a little world that seems to take them out of the human interaction and real present-time dialogue. And I get concerned about that. And it's something that I think is part of the barrier of having the type of dialogue that we need here.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about fossil fuels, our current mode of living on this planet. Now, I've gone off in my tease for this show making wild claims that fossil fuels are obsolete. And Jeane, you wrote a blog today saying that I'm kind of overstating it, and I understand why. I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable. I just would like for our listeners, can you explain why it is that my claim that fossil fuels are obsolete is kind of overstating it?
And I'm being picky, but we will still have the market for all sorts of products. Like, unfortunately, plastics will be with us for a while, and pharmaceuticals based on petroleum and other petroleum and coal products. So, yeah, I was just being Virgo there, Tim.
Right. Well, no, and I understand plastics and other materials use oil in production, and obviously for the near term, that's something that, I don't see us getting away from either. But for actual energy, for power, for fuel, because of these devices that you guys know about that have been, these are the things that we do know about. We don't even know about the things that we don't know about that have been suppressed. Given the fact that is zero-point energy, and we haven't covered anti-gravity, but if there's indications that there's also successful anti-gravity devices. If we do have zero-point energy and anti-gravity devices, they are a present reality within some segments of our civilization. That technically makes fossil fuels for transportation or powering a home or heating an office building all kind of obsolete. So I think that's what I was trying to say without saying that, humanity can completely get off the oil. That's not what I'm saying. But I think for powering and energy, the infrastructure is not there.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Factories need to be made, workers need to be trained, but the technology exists, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, the inventions have been invented. The actual ready-to-market technology doesn't exist in most cases because the money hasn't gone into developing and refining and engineering into reliable products. But the basic inventions do exist. Well,
let's talk about why not. Why isn't the money there? Why hasn't the work gone into them? Like I said, Joel, you worked with Dr. Brian O'Leary. As I understand it, he sort of deserves credit for bringing the suppression of this technology by the government to the public's attention. Is that correct?
I think that's a fair statement. Brian, after leaving the academic world as a professor of physics in the Ivy League, astrophysics specifically, Brian had a number of travels around the world investigating these claims of anomalous energy production from strange devices, and had a chance to see firsthand a lot of the inventors and what they had come up with. And he became convinced that there was something to this, and not only in one case or two cases, but that the scene was replete with various types of devices that were able to produce energy from a source that wasn't being tapped into commercially. And so Brian started to write about this and wrote a number of books and did lectures for many years, educating thousands of people about what he had come upon. And it was very difficult for him because here was someone who, when he was in the NASA program, in the Apollo program, then coming out and being in the mainstream Ivy League world, he had, the media pretty much there, always willing to listen to what he would have to say. But then as soon as he started to step into this world where, kind of mainstream science cast a jaundiced eye at it, he started to be pushed more toward the margins, and then eventually, I think it'd be fair to say he was kind of blackballed from that community. And I think that he felt that very keenly personally, because he always felt that, look, if you claim you're going to be a scientist, then you need to follow the scientific method, which means that you examine the data. You don't state a dogmatic position and summarily exclude something simply because it doesn't fit your existing worldview. And scientists can become very unscientific when there's a discovery that apparently would leapfrog their own research. And I know that from many decades, working in industrial science myself and, dealing with a lot of other researchers. And very quickly you find that people become very threatened when they find that there's some technological development that can all of a sudden result in their research funds being cut off. So that's a human reaction, not just with scientists, but with all people, especially when they're faced with something that affects their livelihood. So that's a heavy part in the politics of science. It doesn't necessarily have to do with, black budgets and men in black and all that kind of thing. Not to say that element isn't there too, but just the very real aspects of a human reaction and fear of their vested interest being threatened. And I know what that feels like myself. I'm sure each of us on this phone and in your audience does as well. So I think that's one of the first things here is when science is not willing to take a look at the data as the data, but have already said, no, I can't look at that because it doesn't fit my world.
Well, and let's talk about the depth of what has been kind of dismissed summarily, like you said. O'Leary said in 1998 that 3,000 patents had been suppressed by the U.S. government. Patents and technologies and applications for patents. Now, the American Federation of Scientists updated that number at the end of 2010 to at least 5,135 patents suppressed.
Right.
That's a lot.
That is a lot, and those aren't all energy. A lot of those are advanced propulsion and other types of technologies that I guess the Department of Defense and the Commerce Department collaboratively could give an opinion that these threaten the national security. Now that's kind of a cop-out statement, I believe, because there are vested interests that hold a heavy hand over all government agencies, including the Department of Defense and the Department of Commerce. But I myself have seen a Section 181 national security gag order that had been served to a local inventor here in the Portland, Oregon area where I live, and this inventor had showed it to me. And these are real. These aren't some fanciful concoction out of a pulp novel. This is a very real provision that is served by the Department of Defense and the Commerce Department that basically can slap a gag order on an inventor that not only denies them patents, but they also are restricted from speaking at all of the invention, even to their spouse, under penalty of heavy fines and imprisonment. That is a pretty powerful hammer to be holding over someone's head, to keep them silent. And apparently it's happened over 5,000 times in our own country.
That doesn't sound very American to me. I'm sorry, Jeane?
Oh, yes, I was going to say, I know somebody also who was scientist served with such an order back in the 1980s. And couldn't work on his invention, so he went out and started Project Earth since he couldn't work on his invention.
So they say that they're doing it for national security reasons, that pat answer. But in your opinions, why are these technologies really being suppressed?
Well, in my opinion, part of it is because of legitimate concerns for national security. We can't throw that out completely as without merit, because I think in some cases it does have merit. And a simple example of that would be an inventor such as one whom Jeane and I know, who came up with a way to make a nuclear weapon out of what is essentially hospital waste, radioactive hospital waste. Now, that could be used as an energy source, yes, but if distorted and developed wrong-mindedly, it could become a very dangerous weapon in the hands that would use it in that way. So, there are some very legitimate reasons to classify certain inventions, but a lot of it, and I think more the case, is where the commercial development and public deployment of a technology that is so disruptive that it threatens to displace the current energy infrastructure. That's when the heavily moneyed vested interests step in with their influence, and they craft policy and influence decisions and actions. And that's where I think most of this is coming from. I mean, all of us know that there's a revolving door between the big pharmaceutical complex and the FDA. We know the same exists between the military contractors and consultants and the Department of Defense. It happens between big oil and big coal and the Department of Energy. There's a revolving door between industry and our government, and there are very close relationships there, and they're virtually inseparable. So it should be no surprise that vested interests end up having undue influence on a lot of policy and action.
Just by the way the phrase national security is used in lots of ways that I've heard, it's obvious that it's really deeply ingrained in a lot of Washington insiders' point of view that national security and the health of the oil industry are the same thing. Whereas national security, in my mind, is a healthy lifestyle, a healthy environment, a healthy economy for the ordinary person, and the dependence on dirty energy sources is just the opposite of that sort of security. So it really seems backwards to me to make national security synonymous with the health of the oil industry.
Right. Yeah. Totally agree. So, other than wielding the United States government to suppress these technologies, what other methods are you guys aware of that have been used to keep these things from becoming public knowledge?
Well, certainly there's been obstruction at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office itself directly, and I think the most classic cases of that have been in the cold fusion field. I mean, virtually all the cold fusion inventors and researchers, when they have tried to file a patent application for their discoveries, have been denied, and that whole field of research has been held at arm's length, even though there are many within the U.S. government and in the U.S. military now, even in NASA, who have been conducting research, have been going to those conferences, like there's an international conference on cold fusion that's held every year and has been held for at least the last 15 years, and a lot of government people attend those. So, this is something where there's a real double standard. We have our own researchers at the Naval Research Labs and at NASA who have been looking at cold fusion heavily for years and making developments. But yet the Patent and Trademark Office red flags the regular academic inventors or private industry inventors who try to patent that technology. So there's been that type of obstruction at the patent office. But there's been other issues where there's been a lot of legal obstruction to the progress of certain devices as they've gotten closer to market. There have been let's put it this way. You can tie up someone very quickly with a lawsuit, even a very frivolous lawsuit, if you are the party filing the suit and you are well bankrolled and you know that most of these inventors generally have been living hand to mouth for a long time, and they don't have the type of resources to fend off a lawsuit, even if it's just a frivolous one. So it's very easy to delay or squelch altogether a commercial launch by using legal maneuvers. Jeane, I'm sure you know some other strategies that have been used.
Well, human nature, as you mentioned before, Joel, the resistance to something that might take away one's research grants if it's replaced by something that came out of left field. So the academic scientists, particularly the physicists who are really considered to be the top of the pyramid of knowledge, but I sometimes wonder, they had a large part, certain representatives of American Physical Society, Robert Park for one, had a large part in the prevention of certain technologies like blacklight power from getting patents, just by putting a little pressure on their buddies in the patent office.
Well, not to be salacious, but what about more extreme methods? I know that Brian O'Leary presented the death of Dr. Eugene Malov as suspicious. Do you guys have stories of inventors who have come to suspicious ends?
Well, Stefan Marinoff in Europe, for one, the story is that he jumped out of a third floor library window, and I believe it was Belgrade. I knew him. He was just a beautiful, happy person, PhD physicist. So the people with credentials like that seem to be more of a threat to the status quo because their word carries more weight, and he was actually working with a Swiss cooperative community, Maternita, and he knew he'd witnessed their free energy device. I certainly know inventors whose laboratories have been trashed and they've had threats, and I've been told stories of someone I met being beat up, slammed down on the floor of his laboratory. I wasn't there, but I've known several quite credible people who've told me about things that have happened to their laboratories. Obviously set fire in one case and multiple break-ins in other cases.
No,
it's not pretty.
I have, and I have others who I'm aware of the same things, where there's been destruction of laboratories and physical threats and phone threats to the family. And in one case, a disappearance of an inventor who I had been communicating with for quite some time regularly, and then all of a sudden he just no longer was communicating, and I could not locate him anymore. He physically no longer had an address here in Oregon, and it just kind of vanished, which was very strange. And we have another inventor who Jeane and I both know, Nelson Camus, who invented something called the Urine Battery, which basically could use human urine to produce electrical power in a type of battery. And he had demonstrated this technology in an electric vehicle back in the early 90s, and based on the success of that demonstration with an electric car that was essentially being powered just by human urine, he was given $5 million by Arco in exchange for the exclusive license for that technology for a period of 10 years. And that technology was shelved. There was nothing further done with it for that 10 years, and then the technology reverted back to the inventor. But that's one of those classic cases of that we've all heard as the urban legend that someone comes up with the 100-mile per gallon vehicle, and then Big Oil or Big Auto buys it up, and you don't hear from it again because the inventor's been given a big chunk of money. And that's all you hear. So this was a very real case of that type of maneuver.
I just totally imagine our co-host Matt out there just salivating at the idea of being able to drive around on his pee.
Yep.
You'd do that, wouldn't you, Matt?
Yeah, I would.
Matt is he's particularly fond of Brown's gas, so I think that's just the next step is just pee in his truck.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, I know that this stuff is taking it there is kind of ugly and having to talk about that, but I want listeners to understand the depth of the suppression. So I mean, it's not just using using the government to do it, but it's ugly as intimidation and violence and even alleged murder. You can't prove it, but these people aren't the suicidal types, according to the people who knew them, like you guys.
No, I would agree with that. Most of the inventors that I've met have tended to be rather mild-mannered people, and certainly not those who are prone to jeopardize themselves or their families intentionally in any way. But when you consider that the energy economy is estimated somewhere between $5 and $8 trillion annually on a global basis, and that there are whole national economies that are dependent on the production and export of fossil fuels, such as the OPEC nations. It's not a stretch to realize why a lot of people would feel highly threatened at technology that would disrupt that. And it's not to sanction that type of activity where they would take violence as a means to protect their vested interest. But it is something that we all understand as humans, that we become afraid when we feel threatened. And unfortunately, there's still a lot of fear that abounds on our little planet here, and it results in people making selfish decisions rather than working together and collaboratively to come up with solutions that benefit all of us.
And there's the fear of loss of jobs. So many people are connected with the oil industry, for example. But that fear isn't exactly well placed, because different types of jobs could be created that would be more satisfying, because they would be cleaning up. I know people who are working up in the tar sands, and they're not happy about it. One of them says, I got to go back up and make acid rain again this week. They're not happy about it, but they they have to take care of their families. So it's possible to create jobs that are cleaning up the environment instead of messing it up. With the prosperity that would be released if we didn't have to feel that we have to fight oil wars and build big armies to invade other countries to get their resources. And if we knew that we weren't going to have the health care problems that we have now, there's so many of them related to the polluted environment. There's so many ways that there would be so much more money to spend without all these high energy costs. And so it's possible to create a whole different civilization. And that's why Joel and I wrote the book, to get the discussion out into a wider venue, a wider public than just the specialized conferences. Because if we had the best minds on this planet in all sorts of fields, from economics to regional planning and national planning and education and arts and, all the fields, if we had the best minds kind of getting a council of elders together to figure out, there are answers. There are ways to transition into a different type of energy economy without the most terrible dislocations. It's possible to do. It's within the human spirit, the human mind's ability to figure it out, but there just hasn't been the push to the political will, because people don't know about it.
And that's exactly why I wanted to have you guys come on the show and explain to people who haven't heard about this stuff. And you've given me a wonderful segue into what I want to get into next, which is, what does this mean for the world? Today, I was driving home from work tonight, listening to Fresh Air on NPR, and Terry Gross was interviewing a reporter who had spent time in Somalia. He was telling this story about being in a hospital during a horrible famine, which is, I think, fairly recent. The lights in this hospital didn't work. It was full of people on beds just dying because this hospital didn't have supplies. People are dying left and right from malnutrition and starvation, mostly children. And this reporter told this story about a father who was motioning wildly to them. He wanted to get their attention. He wanted them to know something. And they asked the interpreter, what's going on? And the guy said, my daughter just died. And they watched him close her eyes and, tears streaming down his face, carry her out. And I'm listening to this story, and I almost had to pull over because I was literally moved to tears. And I'm sitting here thinking, if all these technologies that are being suppressed were released, what would it mean for everyone on this planet, especially the poorest of the poor, like the Somalis? I mean, that's my question to you guys. What would it mean for the world if all the things that you know about were not only public knowledge, but publicly available?
Well,
clean water.
Clean water, the ability to produce food anywhere on the planet, whether you're in a desert or on the sea. You would have the ability to essentially have lighting. You could pull water from the atmosphere. You could have growing conditions for plants indoors, anywhere on the planet. You would have an environment that need not be destroyed or soil depleted or water become polluted from fertilizers. There's all kinds of things related to a new era of abundance. And that's always kind of the first word that comes to my mind is this issues. This would usher in a whole new paradigm of abundance that this planet has never known in recorded history, and it's something that it's very, very much at our fingertips, and this could be brought about if we exercise the collective will for it. The education is part of that, certainly, but it means that we got to change. We can't accept that children dying of starvation or of treatable disease or people dying of dysentery or cholera because they've been drinking polluted water. We can't go on accepting that, that's just the way it is, and those tens of millions need to die every year because this is totally unnecessary. There are other things as well. We would have the capability not only to stop being so extractive in our resource development, in our natural resource development, such as mining for metals and ores and for coal and things like that, but we'd have the ability with the free energy technologies to recycle virtually everything to a high degree. We could be mining our landfills for the resources that are there. We could go into the ocean and clean up these millions upon millions of tons of garbage that are swept into the oceans every year. We could recover that. There's numerous ways to reclaim the land and the air and the waters if you have free energy. If you look at even forest management itself, which is near and dear to me because that's an industry that I cut my teeth on coming out of college, was the pulp and paper industry. We would not have to clear cut forests. If we had helicopters that were propelled by a fuelless technology that's essentially free, you could selectively harvest the weak trees out of a forest at very low cost. You would not need to clear cut, and those remaining trees could grow into a strong, mature forest and eliminate the blight of a
we could just grow hemp.
You could grow hemp as well, which would be that'd be a wonderful change to do something like that. That would be an enlightened move, But of course, you got to get over some of these social and dogmatic positions around something like that, where there's so much emotion attached to a single word. But there's all kinds of things. We could be growing food, all along the roadways if we now had vehicles that emitted no exhaust because they didn't burn anything. So you could be going down the highway and planting fruit trees, berry bushes, vegetables. Why do we have to have all this wasted land along our roadside? Right now, it's so heavily polluted from the exhaust streams from our vehicles. But that could be remediated. That could be remediated and changed right there. So that there's so many different potential solutions that would result in a healthier, more beautiful, and more harmonious world with the widespread adoption of free energy. We can't even conceive what that world would look like. We have a few of these concepts here, but to really know what that would look like is almost beyond our imagination. But it would be wondrous, and it is a very appropriate gift for our children and our grandchildren. And I have both. I know Jeane has both. Probably you guys do too. But it's one of the things, one of the primary motivators for us to do the work that we do.
Well, then I thank you for my kids' sake, because I don't have grandkids, but I do have kids, and that is definitely one of the things at the forefront of my mind, thinking about what are we leaving them. And Americans always like to say that our parents tried to give us a better life than they had, but we can't do that anymore. And, that's kind of the next step to me is, we've got to stop suppressing this. We've got to get people to understand what's possible and to form the collective will to make it happen.
It could be a better way of life. Something I feel really strong about is, I have beautiful nephews in the military, and they strongly believe that it's really necessary to defend the way of life that for their wives and the truth is it's not necessary to have the horrors of war in order to have the energy resources. It's just totally unnecessary and has been for a long time to have to be fighting energy wars.
How long?
Well, if all the even conventional energy alternatives, solar, wind, geothermal, tidal power, tapping into offshore riptides, if all those sources, even not mentioning the exotic sources of energy, if all the accepted clean alternatives had been really developed to their full potential and put to use in time, it could have been clean energy world for quite a while. But of course, Nikola Tesla and Victor Schauberger and others, T.H. Morey, many decades ago, these people showed the way to tapping the background energy of the universe. So, it's been a long time that it hasn't been...
Decades.
Yeah.
Now, you guys are serious researchers, and I understand you deal with facts on the ground. You've cautioned me not to be overzealous in declaring these technologies are about to be released to the world, because that's your understanding. I guess I am fortunate in that I don't have an author's integrity and reputation to worry about and uphold. I can go live on the internet and spout all the crazy stuff I hear on what I like to refer to as the 2012 Underground. For instance, I'll have a special interview tomorrow night with an individual named Tolik, who's very well known in that scene, and he's indicated he'll share some pretty spectacular information about coming actions by some of our extraterrestrial friends. There are really strong indications in the circles that I pay attention to that the powers that be are very close to becoming the powers that were in a very public way. And if that's true, the entire world is about to change. But what I want to know is, are you guys hearing from your colleagues, associates, insiders about any coming changes that might bring about these new technologies?
Well, myself, it's only the technological end of things that the developments are progressing so well. But you go ahead, Joel.
Yeah, I certainly hear much of the same discussion that you just spoke of there, Tim. And I have many colleagues that are in both mainstream circles and in those that you might call the underground alternative circles as well. And I think it's good to keep a foot in both of those realms. whether they are, whether these changes are imminent, as in the next year or two, or something that's a decade off, that's the harder thing to judge. Now, is it coming? Is it going to happen? Well, I'm an optimist. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing this stuff. And I do believe that these changes will occur. I'd like them to occur sooner rather than later, because I think that would result in a transition without as much tumult for everybody. But a lot of it will be dictated by how rapidly does the populace wake up and take a mature look at what's going on and make a willful decision to put the distractions aside and to take responsible, nonviolent action to help make the changes occur. To me, that's the biggest wild card. It's not about whether off-world visitors are here readying their own plans outside, humans' plans. To me, it's very much a human issue, and it's in our laps. It's our responsibility. If this is the planet that we've been, set upon, then daggone it, we've messed it up. It's on us to clean it up and take responsibility and accountability for it. And that's an eventuality, but sometimes the nest has to get so fouled and so irritating that then then we start to clean up the room. I would just hope that happens sooner rather than later.
Me too. Just a couple minutes left. I was going to say, Jeane, do you have any parting message for listeners? Any words of wisdom or hope?
Well, I don't know if this is a parting message, but I was going to say that because I had written a book back in the 90s called The Granite Man and the Butterfly, the David Hamill story, and spent weeks interviewing this man who had experiences on board a craft, that I know when people tell me that there's been a lot more sightings. I remember what he was told, what David Hamill was told. He was warned, and this was a benevolent, that's the word, race apparently that contacted him. He was told that they're really concerned about our nuclear fission technologies, and that the effects of our nuclear radiation technologies can extend farther beyond the sphere that we think holds them in. Beyond the third dimension? Yeah.
So anyway, 1 minute left in the show. So I just want to, real quick, thank you guys for coming out here and sharing what you know and giving us a little more than what the general public knows about. And I want to tell people, go check out their book. The book is Breakthrough Power, How Quantum Leap New Energy Inventions Can Transform Our World. Make sure you get the newly released second edition, right, guys?
Yes, and it's also out in electronic form now.
You can get it on Kindle.
Favorite outlet, yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's an Amazon link on our Facebook page. Go to facebook.com/extraordinaryyear, one word, and you can go directly to their book. You can also read on each of these guys. We've got bios up. You check out Jeane's website at changingpower.net, Joel at newenergymovement.org, and I'm sorry, we are out of time. I'd love to talk to you guys again some other time.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.